Hello, everybody. Welcome to Exploring Ethics with Thibodeau and Kelly. I'm Kelly. That's Thibodeau. Uh, so we're talking about ethics, and we're relating ethics to reasons. What are we not relating ethics to? What we're not relating ethics to is command or the tables of the law, the Ten Commandments. Uh, our view, uh, tentatively speaking, is that reasons uh, help us understand what we should do, and the province of ethics is what we should do. So, what we have talked about up to now um, is that reasons count in favor of some action or attitude, that sort of thing. Reasons count in favor. And so if we're wondering what we should do, that's very closely related to the question, what do we have reasons to do? Um, Secondly, reasons come from facts. Reasons don't come from motives. Reasons don't come from beliefs. Reasons come from facts. And thirdly, and I think we just barely touched on this last time. Some reasons are decisive reasons. And so we, or I think, Jason, we ought to talk about tonight what it is that make reasons decisive. How do we understand reasons in such a way as to decide what we should do?
Mhm.
Go.
Oh, well, let me make maybe a couple of friendly amendments. And one is just with regard to facts. When we say facts give us reasons, I think it's important that we're talking about, facts, things that are the case, completely irrespective to our reactions or attitudes towards those things, right?
Yeah.
So that Mary and your wife is allergic to orange peel oil. That fact, irrespective of anybody's attitude towards it, feelings about it, that fact is what gives us reasons. Right?
Okay.
So that, I mean, maybe that was clear, but I just wanted to.
No, no, I appreciate it.
And then the other thing was the idea of decisive reasons. Um, so I think it's not. We don't want to say that some particular reasons are always decisive. I think what we want to say is that in particular contexts, we have decisive reasons to act in a particular
Mhm.
way rather than in other ways, right?
Uh, would the word context, speaking as an English teacher, is notoriously vague, notoriously indefined. How far does context extend? Is the problem for literature. Uh, and so would situation be an acceptable alternative to the word context?
Yes, and it's exactly the word I was going to suggest.
Okay. So I would like to step outside the frame for just a minute before you go on decisive reasons. Uh, and just review with you, Jason, and with our audience, what I think you and I are doing. And it's complicated by the fact that what we are doing is complicated by the fact that you and I are both college professors. And college professors have uh, a dual role. Actually, institutions think we have a triune role, but we have at least a dual role of teaching and scholarship, teaching and research. Um, and those two roles are not entirely compatible. And in a way, I think we're going to constantly bump up against this difficulty because on the one hand, so you're a philosophy professor, and as a philosophy professor, you want to represent philosophy correctly. Indeed, as a philosopher, you want to understand wisdom and truth and goodness and things like that. Um, but the other role is that of teacher. And so what we have to do is act like the experts we are. And I'm not the expert in philosophy, that's for sure. You are that. Um, but we also have to be able to introduce the subject matter to students, and that is to say our audience, who are not experts, you know. And this is, I think that this is just an irresolvable, insoluble, I don't know. This is just a frankly insurmountable difficulty with what we're doing. You once said to me that understanding ethics is at least as difficult as understanding quantum mechanics. And I've come around to the view that it's a lot harder because quantum mechanics, uh, I think, as a subject matter, can be more or less defined. I mean, there's always discoveries to be made in quantum physics, uh, but philosophy, or even the branch of philosophy called ethics, is infinite. So it's infinitely difficult. What a teacher has to do is facilitate learning, basically make it easy for somebody to understand something. And so the horrible temptation for a teacher is to dumb it down so the students can get something, you know. So when you offered a couple of friendly amendments, I was very pleased, especially since I'm much more like the student and you're much more like uh, the the teacher in our relationship, at least as uh, uh, insofar as philosophy is concerned. So um, it's not that there's a particular variety of reason that's always decisive. Uh, and reasons are decisive uh, only in the context of certain situations where we have to make a decision. What should I do?
Yeah.
Okay. So how do we make a decision? How do we know what we should do?
Um, well, I mean, is this just saying what we've already said? I think the view we're defending is that what we should do is what we have most reason to do, everything considered, right?
All
Now,
things considered.
all things considered, right? And
Now, does that phrase render us impotent? Does that phrase, all things considered, mean that we can proceed no further?
no, not at all. I mean, there's an issue here, and it's an epistemological issue to some extent, to a large extent. Um, Obviously, we are limited, and so we cannot consider all things. But we can do. So one thing we can do is we can describe an idealized situation where we can limit it and just say this is the situation, and then we can consider all the things in that situation. Now, the real world isn't like that. And you might think, well, but then that toy situation you have is totally irrelevant. It's not irrelevant, because what it tells us is something about the significance of various factors present in that situation. And if there are real life situations that are similar, then we should think that the factors present in the ideal situation have a similar weight in the real situation, right? Um, so that's one thing. The other thing is,
Significance, weight,
yeah,
those are key terms here.
right. So, I mean, the other thing is that we can, in any real life situation, we can start listing the features of the situation which we think are relevant to our reasons, and and then we can start thinking about their various weights, right? And we can, at some point we're going to stop and say that's all that seems relevant, or that's all I have time to consider, or something like that. And we can still, at that point, make a judgment about what we have considered. And I think that we can reasonably think in many situations that we have actually probably considered all of the relevant uh, if, aspects of the situation that are relevant to our reasons. So part of this is going to be proof. Proof is in the pudding. Let's see how this is done, and I hope later today in this episode we're going to get some actual examples and talk through how we would
Well,
think about.
let's go for it.
Okay.
So let me start you with an example that you conveniently supplied me with recently.
Mhm.
Um, so this 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 is an actual real world example in two ways. But I remember a conversation I once had with my father-in-law, who claimed that if a school were to teach children that it's ever okay to lie, that would be a very bad thing. Um, and I remember, so this was decades ago that we had this conversation. Um, we were having a conversation about school teaching and, the difficult question. It's a very complex question about character education. I mean, what is the role of ethics in pedagogy? Are ethics a subject for school, or is that something that should be handled in families? Um, and basically, it came out that he held the view that it is always wrong to lie,
Mhm.
that there's a law against it, moral law commands that we refrain from lying. Um, and this conversation took place during a Christmas vacation, you know, and all of my kids uh, were very cheerful because they had received presents from Santa Claus. And I freely admit that I didn't gainsay the claim that their presents came from Santa Claus. I, as I recall, I didn't actively promote it on that occasion. But I didn't correct my children when they said that Santa Claus had provided them with gifts. So who's right? Me, the guy who lies to his kids, or my father-in-law who claims that it's always wrong to lie?
Well, I think your father-in-law is definitely wrong. And if we don't,
Yes,
and if we don't like the Santa Claus example, we can turn to the Nazi example. And
the
that is
Nazi example.
sure because uh, now this is a made up example, but I think it's close enough to things that actually happened in the 1930s and 40s in
Yeah,
Europe. So uh, Nazis knock on your door and ask you whether there are any Jews living in your attic. The right thing to do is to say no, even if that is a lie.
Yeah.
Um, so that's a made up example, but it's referring to things that almost definitely occurred, things like that.
Well, I mean, so a family concealed Anne Frank in their house for a very long time. And I think there were some occasions when they were confronted about that situation. So yeah, so you believe, Jason, that this is not a controversial issue,
I
right?
don't, yeah, I don't
I
think
mean,
it's,
the word controversy is not the greatest word, but you think that it's incontestable that if Nazis are asking whether you're concealing Jews in your house, and you are, the right thing to do is to lie and to say, no, I'm not.
yeah, I think that that is definitely the right answer. I have no doubt that it is.
Yeah.
Now, obviously, people have disagreed. I mean, Kant famously said it is always wrong to lie. And he used different examples, but are very similar, like
Immanuel Kant,
murder.
18th century German philosopher.
Yes, and I don't want to get bogged down into Immanuel Kant's views, but he considered examples where a murderer is chasing your friend and asks you a question that would, if you answered it truthfully, reveal the location of your friend. And the question is it okay for you to lie to the person? And Kant said, no, you can't lie to him, even though the person's explicit intent is to
Yeah.
kill your friend.
Yeah.
Kant's got to be wrong about that. Now, why?
Okay.
Well,
So is it therefore always okay to lie?
no. So, right,
Okay. So you're saying it's sometimes okay to lie.
I am.
Okay. So how
Now,
do you know when you should lie and when you shouldn't?
so I'm going to introduce something that sounds paradoxical and a claim that sounds paradoxical, but I think it is true. And I'll just preface this by saying one of the greatest statements about the study of philosophy and in the you know the process of becoming interested in philosophy. One of the greatest statements I ever heard was from one of my undergraduate professors, John Searle, and he said that the key to being a good philosopher is to see something that's very ordinary that people see all the time. That's very common, and to yet think of it as a problem. Okay, so and I don't know if this quite fits that, but I want to introduce it as something that looks paradoxical. But I think people say these kinds of things all the time, or things that imply it at least. So the claim I want to make is this: lying is wrong, but it is not wrong to lie to kids about Santa Claus. Or lying is wrong, but it is not wrong to lie to the Nazis about whether there's a Jewish family living in your attic. So how can that be? Um, so it seems paradoxical. It seems like you're saying something false, and I'm saying you're not. You're not saying something false. So this requires you to really think about what's being said when people say that. So let's focus on the first part. Lying is wrong. What does that mean? What is it? What are we doing when we're saying lying is wrong? Well, we're evaluating morally something. But what are we evaluating? Are we evaluating a particular instance of an action? Are we evaluating Greg Kelly's act of telling his kids that Santa Claus is coming tonight
Or has already come?
or has already come? Santa Claus came last night, kids, right?
Look, see the proof.
Right? How would the presidents have gotten here? I mean, come on. Um, so are we evaluating particular instances? And I want to just say, at first glance, it doesn't seem that we are. We're saying lying is wrong. Not this instance, not Greg Kelly's instance of lying is wrong. Right? Lying is so, and lying is not a particular action, it's a type of action. Right? So it looks like we're evaluating an action type rather than an instance. And I'm going to call those instances, I'm going to call instances of actions tokens because of, in philosophy, this distinction between types and tokens is commonly used in
Types
lots
and
of different.
tokens.
Yeah.
Okay.
So for example,
You sure you
uh,
couldn't just live with the ordinary language of instance,
I could, but does that
type and specific instance?
I suppose I could, but token is so much easier to say. So I have a black cat. Black cat is a type. Galileo, who was on my lap a moment ago, he left though, is an instance or a token of the type. Okay.
Yes, yes,
We are
yes.
both tokens of the type human being.
I believe I speak for our audience when I say you might have to put a couple of extra syllables in there, but people have a really hard time when you use a word from that we use all the time in one context and use it with a very special meaning in a different context.
So you're
So
telling me to
this
say,
is the expert student
okay.
problem.
So I
Yeah,
should say,
I know we're on a digression here, but I think this is really important. I really want our audience to understand that we're aware of the problem.
yeah.
And I may be exacerbating the problem right now.
No, I don't think so.
But you know, I know what a bus token is. I
Hmm.
know that I don't know what a non-fungible token is,
Hmm.
right? But I have never heard the pairing of type and token. Now you tell me that it's quite common in philosophy, and I totally believe you, you know. Um, but you can believe me when I tell you that my first year composition students are not going to worry too much about using the possessive with the gerund.
Hmm. So, okay, so what you want,
Even though my using the possessive with the gerund, you see what I did there, is a typical practice.
mhm.
So anyway, okay, since I've ranted about it, I'm totally comfortable now with type and token. So go ahead.
Well, but for our audience, should I use instance or what should I mean,
I would feel better if
okay.
you, but only if you're comfortable. I mean, right? We don't want to dumb it down.
Yeah, no, I'm comfortable with it. And one virtue of the word instance is that one way to think about the relationship between a type and a token is that the token instantiates the type,
Good.
right? And so it's an instance of it. So Galileo is
Oh,
an instant.
instantiates an instant. Okay.
So Galileo is an
Serves
in
as an instance of.
exactly.
Okay.
So the type black cat, Galileo is an instance of, and that's just a different way of saying that Galileo instantiates the type black cat.
Okay.
Okay, so I will try to use the word instant.
Okay. So lying is a type of action,
Yes,
uh, and a specific instance of lying, a particular lie somebody tells, like about the existence of Santa Claus or the presence of a Jewish family, would be a token that instantiates that type.
exactly. Precisely.
Okay.
Yes. Or and I'm going to say instance.
Great.
So instance and token, just the same thing for now.
Close enough.
But I'm going to say instance.
Good.
Okay, um, so when we say lying is wrong, we seem, just if we're taking it at face value, that we are evaluating an action type. We are not evaluating any instance or instances. However, you might think that when we say that lying is wrong, we're actually evaluating all instances of lying. And so, what we mean to be saying is that every instance of lying is wrong. Right? And of course, I think people sometimes want to say such things, forgetting about whether they're true or not.
Mm-hmm.
People do want to say such things as maybe an example would be abortion is wrong. I think some people who say that do want to be saying, and maybe even take themselves to be saying, that every instance of abortion is wrong. But I don't think that's what people are doing when they say lying is wrong, but lying to Santa Claus is not.
Lying about Santa Claus.
Yeah, or lying lying to Santa Claus or about. Maybe lying.
If you went there and told him that you wanted a football when in fact you wanted a BB gun.
Yeah, well, right, because you were worried that he wouldn't give you the BB gun, so you lied to him. So you get something. You lie about Santa Claus. Yeah, so I mean, I don't. I think that, and for one thing, I don't know that people say things like this that often, but I think on occasion we do. We say something like lying is wrong, but lying to your kids about Santa Claus is not wrong. But more often we'll say at one moment lying is wrong, and then maybe a few moments later it's not wrong to lie about Santa Claus. Something like that, right? And so, unless we want to convict all the people who do that of a blatant contradiction, because if what they're doing is evaluating all instances of the type, then they're saying something contradictory. Every instance of the type lying is wrong. That means every lie is wrong, but the lies about Santa Claus are not wrong. If we don't want to convict such people of blatant contradiction, then we should think about a different way of understanding what they're saying. Another thing to think is that, is it really true that every instance of lying is wrong? I mean, I don't know what your father-in-law would say about the Anne Frank example. Um, I don't know, but he may say, yeah, it's wrong. I don't know. As I said, Kant seems to have said that, or said something that implied it anyway. In any event, let me get to a second interpretation. Oh, and by the way, one other thing about types is that types can have subtypes, right? So there's the type cat and the subtype black cat, and a
Mm-hmm.
different subtype calico cat. Right?
Mm-hmm.
And then of the subtype black cat, there's a subtype male black cat. Right? So
Mm-hmm.
subtypes can have subtypes. All of them are types. A subtype is a subtype just in virtue of being embedded in a larger type.
Mm-hmm.
But the larger type cat is also embedded in a larger type house pet, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So the type lying, one subtype is lying to children. Another subtype, a subtype of that is lying to children about Santa Claus, right? Another subtype of lying would be lying to Nazis. And a subtype of that would be lying to Nazis about the presence of a Jewish family in the attic, right? All of those are types. None of those is an instance. An instance is it happens at a particular spatial temporal location. That it happens in a place at a time. Right? In 1982, in Tallahassee, Florida, you said, "Hey kids, look, Santa Claus came last night." That's an instance,
Mm-hmm.
and it's an instance of lie. Okay, so that's just a side about types. Um, but so what I'm back to now is, how do we understand the claim or claims like lying is wrong? So one interpretation that I've rejected is all instances of lying are wrong. I think a different way of understanding it is that what we're saying is something about the um, the moral value, the moral relevance. I'm tempted to say normative relevance, but I know that would be potentially confusing or
Mm-hmm.
introducing new terminology. So I'll just stick to moral relevance about the um, typifying features of the type. So what do I mean by typifying features? Well, the typifying features of a black cat is it's black and it's a cat, right? It's pretty straightforward, right? And so it's the features that all instances of the type share, and also they're the features that make something an instance of the type, right? So being black and a feline, all black cats share that. Every instance of black cat shares that. Here's the black
Oh,
cat.
look at there.
Yeah.
Visual aids.
He heard us talking. His ears were burning, and
Do you know you're an instantiation?
he doesn't know that. He doesn't know much. He knows his food bowl is empty and his litter box is clean. That's all he knows. Um, so, um, okay. So, in the case of lying, the typifying feature is that it's an instance of speaking when someone says something, they make a claim that they believe to be false, right? That's the typifying feature of lie.
Mm-hmm.
And so what I'm saying is that when we say lying is wrong, what we often mean is that uh, that typifying feature always counts against doing it, right? So that an act is an act of saying something that the speaker believes to be false, always counts against doing it. Does that make sense?
Yep. Yep. So there's always a reason to refrain from lying.
There's always a reason to refrain from lying just because it's an instance of lying.
Mm-hmm.
Now, but that claim is consistent with the additional claim that lying to children about Santa Claus is not wrong. Why? So, someone who says that something's being an instance of lying always counts against doing it, is always a reason to refrain from doing it. Well, can also acknowledge that in some instances, those reasons are overcome or overwhelmed by other reasons. So maybe we can see this easier in the Anne Frank example.
Mm-hmm.
So someone who says lying is wrong says that you have a reason to not lie to the Nazis. That
You have a
reason is
reason to
always
not
present.
lie to anybody.
Yeah.
Comp said you definitely have a reason to refrain from lying to duly constituted authority. Our Nazi henchman duly constituted authority. Uh, well, politically, yes, you know, uh, morally, no. So, in any case, I easily accept that we always have reason to tell the truth and to refrain from lying.
Right, right. And so, but we can also say that in that particular instance, in 1939 Amsterdam, on whatever occasion it was, whatever date it was, the family, and I don't remember the name of the family who was hiding, allowing the Franks to live in their attic, but um, that they had also had reasons to not tell the truth. And those reasons were very powerful. Why? Well, because if they told the truth, the Frank family would be captured, sent to a concentration camp, and potentially be killed, which is, of course, what happened to them eventually, anyway, at least most of them. They were captured, they were sent to
It certainly
concentration,
happened to Anne.
and certainly Anne died. Yeah. So, um, so the need to protect the welfare and lives of that family gave the owner of the home reason to lie to the Nazis, and those reasons um, were more powerful than their reason
Or
not to lie.
strong.
Were stronger. So you think of reasons as those reasons are pointing in opposite directions. One reason says don't lie because you always have a reason not to lie. But other reasons, the welfare and lives of the need to protect the welfare and lives of the family, pointed in the opposite direction, and those reasons were strong. So that when we consider overall the situation and all things considered, we can say what he had most reason to do was to lie to the Nazis. Okay. So again, lying is wrong, but lying to Nazis is not wrong. That's true. That could be true. I think it is true. Why? Because lying is wrong. What that means is we always have reason not to lie, just because of what lying is. Because of what lying is, we always have reason not to lie. But in these particular instances of lying that fall under the subtype lying to Nazis about the presence of a Jewish family, uh, it's not wrong to lie because there are other reasons present.
Yeah. So there's a Latin term for this feature of reasons, and that is pro tanto. Tanto means so much. Pro means for so far. So reasons go so far, but they can be, if this word choice, trumped by other reasons, right? That there may be stronger reasons against or in favor of the contrary uh, to the reasons for a particular action. So my father-in-law is right. Under most circumstances, it's wrong to lie. It's certainly wrong to lie when we are exploiting somebody and depriving them of the capacity to consent, which is what happens with your ordinary everyday lie, like the dog ate my homework, or I'll pay you Tuesday for a hamburger today.
Or the
I guess that's a lying promise, which your undergraduate teacher knew a lot about.
my
Didn't he?
undergraduate.
Didn't Searle write about that? Who, by the way, is a
Oh, yeah,
towering figure in 20th century American philosophy.
he is. Yeah, a somewhat problematic one because of things that happened at the end of his career, which I won't go
He got
into.
into Me Too trouble, didn't he?
He did. Yeah.
Yeah, poor guy.
Yeah. Yeah. Um. So, but yes. By the way, that the word choice issue. This is a ridiculous aside, but my wife's family plays this game called euchre, and in euchre,
Gosh, that's an old-fashioned game.
it is. It's a
I mean,
very
they played that in like the 18th century
yeah. It's an old game. Maybe I
before. Well, it
certainly
kind of evolved into bridge, right?
it's very similar to bridge. Yeah, not very similar, but it's similar enough. You have a partner like you do in bridge. Yeah. And you bid in a similar way to bridge. But there's a Trump suit. And so in 2017, when we started playing euchre for the first time after the 2016 election, all of us agreed that we didn't like calling it the Trump suit. And so we thought, well, what should we call it instead? And I said, let's call it the Pence suit.
The Mike Pence suit.
So for a long time, we called it the Pence suit, which I thought was um, anyway.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. But the point is that reasons count in favor of some action or attitude.
To
But there can be stronger reasons than the reason that stands in favor of a particular action or attitude. And
right.
so this is, I think, two things are worth stating explicitly. The first is the decisiveness of reasons isn't to do with a type of reasons, but is to do with context or situations. And most of the situations we find ourselves in are more or less complicated, and there are reasons for contrary uh, actions or attitudes.
Mhm.
That's one thing. But the other thing is that when we understand that reasons are pro tanto, that they only go so far, I think this is extremely helpful and this is extremely reassuring. I think it's another factor that excuses us from a lot of anxiety about all things considered. That no, nobody can consider all things. We don't know all facts. Um, but when we um, analyze the situations we're in, and I'm going to put in a little promo promotion for analytical thinking. When we analyze the situations we're in, we can understand um, various reasons that sort of move our thinking in one direction or another.
Yeah. Um, yes. It might. Do you think it'd be helpful to talk about another example?
Well, you mentioned the abortion example,
Right.
and that's a political hot button.
It is.
Um, and so it's politically kind of astonishing to me how, in the space of a few decades, um, a view that abortion is always wrong uh, became the politically dominant view. So, uh, on the face of it, we have uh, reason to understand that sweeping claims like abortion is always wrong are suspect because there might be countervailing forces at work. So, do you want to speak to that?
Right. So sometimes when I talk about ethics, um, people bring up this concept of absolutes, and some people really associate moral facts with absolutes, as in something is always wrong or something like that. I think that's what they mean. Like if if you believe in morality, you got to have hard and fast rules,
Yes,
moral
yes,
absolutes, such as
yes.
that lying is wrong, right? Now, but what is the problem is I don't know what that's supposed to mean. And on the one hand, it could mean always it's wrong to lie. In every instance, it's wrong to lie. Every instance of lying is wrong. Similarly with abortion, it's an absolute that abortion is wrong, someone might say. Well, what does that mean? Does it mean that every instance of abortion is wrong? Or does it mean what I'm suggesting, we sometimes, at least sometimes mean, which is merely that in the case of lying, the typifying features of lying always give us reasons to avoid doing it. And similarly with abortion, the typifying features of an abortion always give us reasons to refrain from doing it. If that's what a moral absolute is, then fine. I'm fine with moral absolutes. What I'm not fine with is the idea that we can say about most things that it's always wrong. And so people get into confusion sometimes like this because someone will say, so think about back after 9/11, people would talk about whether torture was wrong, right? Because the U.S. was doing things in that vein, right? Torturing prisoners,
Enhanced interrogation.
and they gave this euphemism, enhanced interrogation. And sometimes in political context, when people would debate this issue, they would create imaginary scenarios where they would say, suppose the person you're torturing, there's a nuclear device in a city, and they know where it is, and the only way to get the information from them is to torture them. Now, set aside concerns about whether under torture people give you reliable information, because that's a big concern.
Hell yeah, it is.
But I want to set that aside. So suppose that wasn't an issue.
I just want to go on record as telling you if I ever find myself in the situation of being tortured, first, I don't know where the microfilm is. Secondly, I'm going to tell you where the microfilm is.
Yes, you will definitely tell you
I
where.
will definitely tell you where the microfilm is.
That's right. Yeah. So, but so is torture always wrong? And someone would say, if someone says, torture is just wrong. Torture is always wrong. And then the opponent says, well, what about this imagined nuclear scenario where you only have a few minutes to find the weapon, and the only person who knows is captured, and you can torture them? Well, um, or even more outlandish, suppose that aliens come to the planet and say, we're going to destroy the planet unless you torture this baby, right? Uh, Totally ridiculous. But the point is supposed to it's supposed to be a problem, and people get confused about it. Well, and people say things about it. Well, in that case, you should do what's morally wrong, right? In that case, you should do the morally wrong thing, which is to torture the baby.
Well, that seems like a very simple contradiction because morally right is what you should do.
That's what I think,
Right? So you have to just figure out what's morally right.
right? And if the
Right.
right thing,
So it doesn't make a big difference, Jason, that you're not voluntarily or intentionally torturing the baby, that in effect, the aliens are torturing the baby. They're just using us as the torture device.
yes, that's exactly true. And the point is, you said it well. The right thing to do is the thing we have most reason to do. And so, if we have most reason to do what the aliens are forcing us to do, then it isn't wrong for us to do it. Yes, it's going to be very painful for us to do it. Yes, it's going to hurt like hell. Yes, we're going to live with scars for the rest of our lives. But no one says that doing the morally right thing is not painful and scarring, right? The morally right thing is the thing we have most reason to do. Okay, so let's get off of the crazy scenarios of nuclear bombs and aliens.
And
And
get to the real scenario of the young girl, preteen, who is pregnant in a state that says all abortions are prohibited.
yes, and so I think it's perfectly legitimate for someone to say, just as they can say lying is wrong, but lying to kids about Santa Claus is not wrong. We can also say abortion is wrong, but a 12-year-old rape victim getting an abortion is not wrong.
I would say virtually by definition, a 12-year-old pregnant girl is a rape victim.
Yes, yes, absolutely right. Yes. Um, and so why? Well, again, we can say that because of the kind of action abortion is, there's always reasons to refrain from doing it. Now, not everybody agrees with that, right? And I think that even for me, I recognize the controversy. I'm my inclination is to think there's always reason to refrain from abortion, and that reason gets stronger the longer the pregnancy goes on, right? So early on, just after fertilization, most women aren't going to know they're pregnant at that point, obviously. But even if they did know, I'd say there's some reason to avoid doing it. When you're 8 months in, that reason is stronger to avoid abortion. Um, but it's perfectly consistent with saying that we always have reason to avoid abortion, with saying that there are lots of instances where abortion is morally permissible, or even that abortion is the right thing to do, maybe even the obligatory thing to do,
Mhm.
right? Because in particular instances, there are going to be other factors present, such as that the woman, the pregnant person, is a child, right? And so therefore a rape victim, right? Or that the pregnant person is having a health complication. And the only way to ensure that she survives is to end the pregnancy through an abortion. And it seems like in those instances, the the factors are there are factors present which favor abortion. And in many of those cases, those factors are stronger than the reason to not.
I think it's worthwhile at this juncture, first of all, to uh, begin our valedictory remarks, because I feel really good about this episode, my dear friends out in Cyberland. Um, I think we got to a very useful point about practical ethics in real situations. And the important thesis is that what we should do is what we have most reason to do. But often there are reasons for and against what we're considering doing. And we have to consider the relative strength of those reasons. Uh, since we have gotten into such a politically charged issue as abortion, I think it's useful or would be indeed necessary for you and me to make a disclaimer that we're not talking about law, we're talking about ethics.
Yeah, that's a very good point, and I'm glad you brought that up. Yeah,
You know, and I think with the promulgation of law, we have just endemic problem, which is that you make a law and then you got to start walking it back, right? So abortion is always prohibited, but we're going to make an exception for rape victims or victims of incest. Um, well, see, it would be wise not to start with the claim that every instance of abortion is wrong. And so I can definitely see why the absolutists don't want to make exceptions for rape and incest, much less the health of the mother. I mean, apparently she should just sacrifice her life and probably, no doubt, the life of her unborn child rather than have an abortion. So, law is one thing. Thank goodness neither you nor I are experts, are an expert in, neither you nor I is an expert in law. I am an expert in grammar.
Yes, you are. Yes, and in the case of grammar, I'm much more of the student than
Yeah, yeah. Well, my PhD is in English. What's yours in, Jason?
in philosophy. Yes,
Yeah. And
surprisingly.
and nobody held a gun in my head and required me to become a literary historian, I just really like Keats and Wordsworth and Blake and poets. So anyway,
Let me say just to add, sort of supplement and to echo what you said about the difference between law and ethics. And so as I see it, the question for abortion that we face politically is really not the question of whether, or not immediately the question of whether abortion is morally wrong or ever morally wrong or ever morally permissible. It's the question of whether the government has the uh, authority or whether the government should outlaw abortion, and if so, when, right? And and it seems like there are a lot of people in this country who think that the government should prohibit it in all instances, or at least in the vast majority of instances. And so what they're saying is that the government should compel women
to
to give
carry
birth,
pregnancies to term.
to carry pregnancies to term, exactly.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
I think, I mean, you can evaluate that on a moral perspective, right? You can evaluate the actions of governments. I think you can say, is that the right thing? Is it right for governments to compel women to
Well,
do that?
this is a problem, and so remember, we're making valedictory remarks.
Yes, sorry, I know. I
No, no, it's
opened up a can of worms.
wait, you're fine. Uh, uh, I mean, it's one thing to ask the question, what should a person do in a particular situation? I think that's the general province of ethics. The problem is when you get to larger aggregates like government, which is a super large aggregate. Um, and then there's the additional issue that ethics is not simply what some isolated individual should do. Notice our ethical questions have to do with our relations with other people, with our children whom we lie to, with right, with the family in our attic and the Nazi henchmen that are trying to apprehend them and so forth. So, I mean, obviously there's a huge social dimension to ethics. Uh, so these are areas that we're going to have to go into in the future. Um, so uh, I hope you don't mind my saying good job, Jason,
Yeah,
and good job, Greg.
good
And
job. Absolutely, good job.
and man, uh, our subscribers number in the tens.
Oh wow, that's pretty good though. I mean, I'm yeah.
Well, they're in the double digits anyway.
Yeah, well, that's I mean, you got to start somewhere.
That's right. And we're not making any money.
No,
No.
yes, and we
Uh,
never will.
I mean, we're not trying to make money.
I'm not trying to make money. That's a good point. So this is an instance of a gray cat.
Oh, how interesting.
Yeah, I think.
Okay.
Yeah,
Well, thank you, Jason. We will resume in what will be a week for us, but indeterminate time for our audience.
Yes.
And thank you, friends, and bye bye here. And you see, I've kind of gone into a little seizure.